Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Paul Krogdahl and Ville Sontu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Hello and welcome to this very, very special episode of Fintech Daydreaming. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see we have a bit of a different setup today, and that is for a very good reason, a very special guest that we'll introduce shortly. But before we do that, my name is Ville Sontu. I will be your host for today's episode, but of course I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Paul Krogdahl. So, Paul, how are you doing today, and how do you feel about the setup?
I'm really excited about this. This is, we've done a few episodes that have been live like this. I think we've done some corporate style episodes. This one here is, it's exciting. It's exciting. We're here. It's looking good. It's professional. It makes a change from our little home studios, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. It has the kind of studio feeling here for sure. It feels like it's very quiet. So no live audience today, unfortunately, but that should make a nice recording nonetheless. Good, but we do have a tradition that we always honor in the podcast, which we will get out of the way because I'm hosting. We're going to do it in the beginning, and that is, of course, the fintech-related joke, which we must have on every episode. So, Paul, did you have a joke for us today?
Unfortunately, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
That's not
unfortunately, I have dug deep into the barrel, and I have found yet another extremely bad and not even good joke.
Okay, but
I actually think we might have had it before, but we've done 10 seasons. I think we'll get into that sort of repetitive reuse phase of bad jokes.
Okay, but still not the bottom of the barrel. It's just almost.
Barrels could be involved. Yes.
All right. So tell us.
Oh, you want the joke?
Oh yeah. No, I don't really, but still.
Okay. Where do fish keep their money?
I think I remember the answer to this one, but tell us.
In the riverbank.
They do, yes. That's exactly. As I remembered. So yeah, that's again. Let's try to find a way to refresh this. All right. So with that out of the way, we apologize for that joke, as we always do in the podcast, and we absolutely should get on with the program and the guest for today. So, as you can see, we are here at Nordea premises today. Again, together with Nordea, we are doing this episode of Fintech Daydreaming. And our guest today is Nordea's Head of Public Affairs, Jyrki Katainen. So, Jyrki, please welcome on stage.
Hi.
Hello. And again, welcome to this podcast. Again, you must be the, I guess, the most prestigious guest we've ever had on the podcast so far. I hope you will enjoy the experience.
Sure.
So again, maybe we should start just by, again, we have listeners from all the way from Taiwan to South America who might not know who Jyrki Katainen is. So maybe say a few words on who you are and how did you end up here sitting together with us?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation to this show. Yes, I'm Jyrki Katainen. I used to be a member of Finnish Parliament for 15 years. I was also a Minister for Financial Affairs during the financial crisis. Actually, it was my first touch to banking sector. So at that time, I needed to study quickly new stuff in order to manage the financial crisis. I was at the same time, or right after that, I was Prime Minister of Finland, and then I joined the European Commission, where I was a Vice President of the European Commission on jobs, growth, investment and competitiveness. At that time, Jean-Claude Juncker was the President. Then I came back to Finland and I had 2 years cooling off period. I couldn't do anything in private sector. So I joined one think tank, which I was leading for a little bit less than 4 years. And then I got a phone call from Nordea, and I have been here for a year now. I must say that I enjoy a lot. I can use my previous kind of experiences and knowledge accumulated from my previous jobs for banking industry and for society as a whole. We are not only working for the bank, but also for the well-being of the citizens and customers.
Wow. Again, people listening, I guess you will now understand that, yes, indeed, we are talking about a very distinguished guest that we have today with us. So maybe we could start by your job today here at Nordea. So you're head of public affairs. So what does public affairs do for banks like Nordea? And what do you do on your day-to-day basis?
Yeah, we have a little Nordic team, so 8 people altogether. And we have basically 3 different dimensions in what we are doing. The first one is increase Nordea's presence in our home markets, i.e. in 4 Nordic countries, so that decision makers, officials, etc., knows what we are doing, what sort of priorities we have, how we can contribute for the good of the societies and stuff like this. And then we also want to influence the decisions made by local decision makers, because we hear a lot from our customers what is going right, what is going wrong, and we also hear a lot what is internationally happening, so we can advise governments and decision makers on various topics. So we are not only lobbying something for us, but we are contributing proactively for the good of the nations and our customers. So the national influence and national level is the first one. The second one is EU level. We are actively involved in EU decision making. So in practice, it means that we meet regularly every week, Commission officials, commissioners, members of European Parliament, their assistants, and we also participate to banking associations work. So we work through the banking associations, but also separately on our own. Because Nordea is the largest bank in Nordic countries. If using market cap, we are 1.5 times bigger than Deutsche Bank.
Yeah.
So we are a large corporate citizen in Europe, one of the largest in Eurozone. So like all the citizens, we have rights and duties. So we fulfill our duties, but we also have a right to convey our messages. And as we are a very committed European organization, we want to make Europeans stronger, more competitive, and more secure. So that's why we are meeting and trying to influence from the outset to for instance, this time, the new Commission's priorities. So this was the second European level influence. And the third one is doing societal foresight, I would say, meaning that once we are actively participating various events and meetings and meeting lots of people, both on national and in EU level, we can sniff around kind of to try to figure out what are the challenges ahead of us. Some sort of trends that will come into the bank, whether we like it or not. I just give you one example, and it's reconstruction in Ukraine. So the day will come when there's a peace, hopefully sooner than later, in Ukraine. And right after, Ukraine will be the largest reconstruction market on earth. And it's very close to our customers. So this is one idea which we have flagged here within the bank, that what is our response to this? Is there anything we should be prepared for the changing situation? Because many of our business customers want to be part of this reconstruction story in Ukraine. So this is just one of the examples of societal foresight. So these 3 elements.
Well, that really covers it. So many follow-up questions. Did you have any in your mind?
I had one very quick question. I mean, everything that you mentioned is absolutely very relevant for Nordea, but it's also relevant for all the other banks, you know, across Nordic, across Europe. Particularly talking about the scale and size of Nordea. Is a lot of this work done in isolation from Nordea, or is this a big partnership and collaboration as well with the other financial institutions to drive a common agenda?
I would say that 90% of the topics which are priorities for us are common for all Nordic banks. So therefore, we cooperate very closely with the other banks, for instance, through Nordic banking associations, but also we have bilateral connections to some of our peers. But then there are 10% of topics which are very Nordea specific. And usually these specificities comes from the fact that we are the only bank in Euro area which has done a cross-border consolidation. And therefore, we are the only bank who faces, for instance, 4 national supervisors' activities. So even though we belongs to ECB camp in a sense that, in a way, so that they are setting capital requirements for us. But there are also lots of power in national level, where the national supervisors can set macroprudential capital buffers for us. So this is just one of the example which is different in our case than in the case with our competitors.
Interesting. The bridging a little bit your background to what public affairs is doing in Nordea, and basically what we just talked about in terms of what types of things we are influencing and we're trying to be a part of. Again, you have an extensive background in public sector politics. How does your background influence maybe your work that you're doing today? I mean, is it completely separate, or is it kind of building on your background from the political scene?
Well, of course, my background helps a lot in this job, because I must say that I know a lot of people, both in our home market governments and elsewhere, but also in the EU level. So it's easier to meet people, and I would say that we have very good access, both on national and EU level. But also that for me, for instance, influencing in the EU level is very natural. So there is nothing special. So my team is not afraid of having a meeting with whoever. So I'm very satisfied for my very talented team. So they know how EU functions, and I'm very happy to be able to help them in this. So societal influence, because I have been on the other side of the table, I know how it functions and what can be done and what cannot be done. So it makes this easier. And maybe finally, we have as I already said, we have very, very talented team. So maybe my political background support our teamwork on analyzing the societal changes. I know that our bankers are so busy with everyday challenges, and it's not their duty to think like what happens within the next 3 years, but it's our duty to try to assess how politics or societies will evolve over the time and bring these elements to further preparations within a bank.
I also assume with the agendas that you've got and you're pushing, having a good background from the public sector and the political environment actually does help you a lot, because at the end of the day you are coming down to politics, whether you want to see it as corporate politics or you want to see it as public politics. It is still being able to work with the inside of that way of working, right?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that my team has very good understanding of homo politicus. So what is the reality in political decision making, how politicians are evaluating topics, and also how public authorities are functioning. Even though our societies are very transparent and there is no kind of secret behind it, but nevertheless, if you have your own experience of being a public official or a politician, at least it makes it easier, or you know exactly how the machinery works.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we are a fintech podcast, so we've had a lot of guests before who are coming from the technology sector and may have transitioned to the financial sector. I myself am one of those people, so I'm coming from an engineering background and seeing the technology vendor landscape and then coming to the bank, which is kind of in the middle. I see the same dynamics here, so the public sector politics, the technology of societies in a way, and then coming to a bank from that side of the question. So there is a interesting harmony there, I would say. And in both cases, it's very important that you have, it's good that you have experience from both sides of the table. I think that's the critical part of that lessons learned from life, I would say. But good. Let's move on to how do you see the role of banks in general? So the role of a bank in society, I mean, people have many opinions about this, and I guess it depends on who you ask. But of course, in your role as the head of public affairs, I guess you must have a very specific understanding what is the responsibility and role of a bank in the society. How do you see that?
Yeah, I must say for the beginning that I told our CEO Frank a few weeks ago that when I joined the bank, I was not 100% sure whether I can find a purpose of this job. And I could not work for any organization without a purpose. Yeah. But then I also said that I have found a purpose, and it's very, very clear, and it's exactly what you asked about. The banks and financial institutions are at the heart of ordinary citizens' life. It's the heart of the society. In good and bad. If banks are doing bad, it's a major problem for the societies. If they are doing good, it makes our life easier and more prosperous. So that's why influencing the decision making is not just cheap lobbying benefits for me, but it's contributing for a common good. This may sound a little bit kind of good explanation, but I feel that it is like this. Because if we manage to convince the EU Commission, for instance, when they are legislating banks or they are doing sustainability legislation or AML legislation or security or whatever, we manage to convince them that we agree exactly what you are trying to achieve, but in order to achieve the goal, take this path instead of that path. So we are contributing to the same goal, but we may have slightly different viewpoint how to get there, because we hear so much from our customers, and we know how private sector functions. So this is that's why I find that the banks are so elementary part of the well-being of the society, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be regulated. We certainly must be regulated, but there is lots of varieties how much, which way to regulate in order to keep our role fruitful and positive towards the society and growth and stuff.
I think there's an extra dimension to that, and we've talked about this multiple times in previous episodes. I mean, the role of the bank is to some degree changing. If we look at traditionally, banks were focused on being deposit takers. That was their business. Banks are becoming more and more custodians of trust, as we see, society changing and everything else, particularly in the Nordics. But with Nordea being so big, do you see that there's a difference between the role that Nordea plays here in the home markets versus Nordea globally?
We are forerunner in many areas. For instance, the Nordic market is the most digitalized market. And it's a very positive thing for our customers. And it's very positive for profit making, for productivity of our work. But at the same time, we are forerunner, because of this, we are forerunner on bank fraud. So fraud is more typical in northern part of Europe than in southern part of Europe, just because the digitalized development. So it doesn't mean that we should be less digitalized, but it just tells about the fact that criminal activities follow the technology.
Yes.
So this is one of the messages, by the way, which we are conveying to EU decision makers, that we know exactly how fraudsters function, what they try to do, and we also have well-functioning medicines because we have hit them back. For instance, in Sweden, we have managed to reduce fraud significantly once we adopted new policies, internal policies. So this is just one of the examples of the differences of our role.
No, I was just going to have a follow-on question. I'll give the floor to you. But one of the things that sort of relates to that, particularly if we're saying the Nordics is dominant when it comes to digital, there is still a, can I say, slow growth of digital literacy, even in the Nordics. I mean, we're all very digital, but at various different levels of capabilities. There's also a issue with financial literacy as banking and financial management gets more and more complicated. There seems to be a need for potentially financial institutions to step in to try and be part of custodians of driving the growth of digital literacy, the growth of financial literacy for the society. What do you see as being the role of the banks in that journey?
It is a significant role, because now we are talking about the fundamental infrastructure of the societies.
Yes.
So digitalization, generally speaking, but also when it comes to banking sector or financial sector. So I would say that it should be taught more extensively at schools, because this is becoming so significant part of our life. But the banks can do their share too. And this is actually one of the areas where Nordea has been one card bank. We have been teaching over the years thousands of pupils in Finnish schools on digital banking and on banking more generally speaking. So we have to step up and be more active in this front and hope that the public education follows us, because I mean, over the decades there are always new trends which reshape the societies, and new topics becomes more crucial and more fundamental from, I mean, very basic from infrastructure point of view. And digitalization and economy and the combination of the two is certainly current focus.
There's an interesting combination of things. Jyrki, you mentioned, of course, digital being one of the reasons why we have a lot of fraud or high numbers of fraud lately here. But I also feel that related to the other point of what is the role of a bank in society is that people in the Nordics traditionally have trusted institutions and governments quite a lot. And now with the rise of AI, there's a lot of people abusing that kind of trust relationship that people are kind of used to having. And now that's breaking a little bit. And I think banks, again, play a critical role in trying to ensure that people are able to navigate through this kind of a transition. But anyway, we could be in the fraud kind of discussion for the rest of the episode. So let's kind of steer away from this cul-de-sac a little bit. And go back to the broader discussion. I want to come back to, you mentioned again, your first touch point to the banking industry was in the financial crisis of all points in history. And now you just told us, how do you see the important role of banks in society? How has your kind of view on banks evolved from that first touch point in the financial crisis to where you are today? Has it evolved?
Not necessarily much, because I understood back in the days the role of the banks, but at that time we all, I think, were in a world where nobody understood exactly how the banking industry had evolved. So subprime, somebody explained to me that it's very easy to understand what subprime crisis means, that if you are buying a sack of diamonds, and somebody says that, by the way, there are 3 crystals. So do you trust on the sack of diamonds if there are, or at least there is an opportunity that they all are not diamonds, but some crystals there. So it was a wake-up call for the regulators that we must do something differently in order to enable fintech happening and financial engineering happening, but at the same time maintaining the trust, because this is trust business completely, and therefore my impression has not changed that much, but I learned that sometimes if the regulation does not follow the technology, then bad things can happen. I may sound a regulatory hawk, but this is not my intention. But what I mean is that in order to maintain and strengthen open market, you must have a level playing field.
Correct.
And this is the role of regulation, in order to level the playing field and in order to increase competition based on level playing field and fintech and financial engineering.
Yeah.
There's an interesting saying, right? We learn from history that we learn nothing from history, right?
Yeah, indeed.
And you're talking about the financial crisis, and it sort of feels to a certain degree that we're tethering on the same point again. We've circled right back round again, and this time hopefully we can make sure that we don't see the same pains again. But from your perspective, are we very close to falling off the edge, or do you think that back to regulation and having learned something from the past?
Actually, one lesson learned I see clearly is that the EU authorities seems to understand that during the last 10 years there has been a massive tsunami of new regulation coming to the banks, and now it's time to take a break, if not complete break on regulation or regulatory actions, but at least give financial institutions and other businesses time to adapt to the situation and also implement everything what has already been decided. So this is what I hear more and more from Brussels, and this is very positive, because I have also told several examples what the latest regulation has meant to Nordea, and we all understand the reason for instance, emission reduction target and stuff like this, and the banks plays a crucial role in this. But there's also limits how much you can push. I mean, how much you can introduce new regulations. So now I would say that, or I believe that during the next 5 years we don't see this much new regulations coming in. Instead, more focus will be put on implementation.
That's interesting, because I mean we've just been hit by the AI Act. We've just been hit by instant payments.
Exactly.
We're about to be hit by digital euro. We've got
Euro.
PSD3 coming. It almost feels like a tsunami of regulations hitting us way too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has been decided like a couple of years ago. Yeah. So all data regulation, all sustainability and banking regulation, there's already been. They all have been already. They all have already been decided a couple of years back, and this is a massive tsunami. So this is exactly why Commission officials are saying that maybe it's enough for the time being, and let's concentrate on implementation.
Yeah. Speaking of natural disasters, I had avalanche here, so so anyway, again, there's a lot of regulation coming, and all of this hitting at the same time. The ultimately, it's about level playing field. We have if you've ever had the chance to listen to the podcast, we actually love to talk about regulation on the podcast. We've had a lot of people who love that, some people who hate it, and still we have a good conversation. But now, recognizing the situation and the intent of the public sector to regulate in order to have a level playing field, and now it's maybe tilted a little bit towards too much regulation, and we're going to hopefully see that even out. But how do you see this way of regulating in Europe in general? So there's a saying that in the US, they do things first and then they regulate once the disasters have happened. Whereas in the EU, the tendency is to regulate first or regulate things into existence or kind of pre-regulate things. How do you see the balance between these two things? I mean, which approach is better? Is there somewhere in between that should be kind of strived for also here in Europe, or how do you see this balance?
Yeah, there is old American joke on when the American businessman is looking at the European market, and he sees that some business is doing well, business is running. Immediately after, he also recognized that the policymaker starts taxing it. If the business still runs well, the Europeans start regulating it. And once the business is dead, Europeans starts to subsidize it. It may be so, but not entirely. So your point is very relevant. The latest example of the challenge you mentioned is the data regulation. So all various punches of regulations which have come through during the last 3 years. So the American model may function well, but at the same time I understand the reasoning behind the European regulation, because data is the most valuable and the fastest increasing raw material.
Yes.
So it can be treated as a raw material. And if you compare data to forest or minerals or whatever, they all are regulated in order to level the playing field so that various interests like business interest, societal interest, and individuals' interests are balanced. So from this point of view, I understand that the EU made quite significant data regulations. So they try to regulate potential new market which doesn't exist yet, or at least that we have seen the first versions of it. So there are only few American tech giants who are using or monopolizing our data without asking anything from me and or from the other companies. And the entry point to the market is very high because the data market is so concentrated.
Yes.
So I fully understand this way of thinking. Then totally different way of looking at this. If you look at how EU regulation gets born, there's first Commission's initiative. So they do the first proposal.
Yes.
Then the Council of Ministers, where all the countries, member states, 27 ministers are gathering together, they negotiate their own stand on this proposal. It's quite often that member states disagree on the substance of the Commission proposals, so they make a compromise.
Yeah.
Finally, there is a member states' view which is based on compromise to the original proposal. At the same time, the European Parliament is doing the same. So European Parliament, they have how many? 10 political parties. And obviously they have different views on the proposal on the table. So there is a need to make a compromise. So they do a compromise. Now we have 2 different compromises. And then in the final stage, these 2 bodies, Council and the European Parliament, start negotiating.
Yes.
Commission's role is to be an honest broker in this negotiation. And at the end of the day, they make the 3rd compromise. So that's why European legislation sometimes is not the clearest possible. Or they even may compromise on very fundamental elements of the original proposal.
Yeah.
So if there were not this democratic angle at all, and it would be only Commission to decide, it might be clearer, more simpler, and maybe even better. But we are living in the democracy. So this explains sometimes that even if we agreed on the fundamental goal of the legislation, the performance might be quite different.
Yeah. I've had the privilege to witness this process as part of the digital euro process, which I'm involved right now.
Yeah.
And this is now going into the parliament for discussions, and it's been in the trilogues and thrown back.
Yeah.
So again, it's fascinating to watch, I can tell you that. But let's not go into the digital euro rabbit hole this time around, because I want to kind of start to round off our discussion today a little bit. But before we do that, I'd like to talk a little bit about leadership. So you are by far the most senior leader we've ever had privilege to have on the podcast. So we have to ask a little bit. So again, for example, one of your posts was the Prime Minister of Finland, and I guess one of the toughest positions, I would say, at least in this country. From what you learned from those tough positions, in leadership positions on the public sector, what lessons have you taken to your job here at Nordea, if any?
One lesson learned from that time of my life was that if there are challenging situations, very bad, and you know from the outset that the listeners, citizens, or in our case, our customers won't like to hear what you should say it. Because it's the only way to maintain trust.
Yes.
So people or customers somewhere deep in their mind believe that somebody is either trustworthy or not trustworthy. And if the judgment is that this person or bank is not trustworthy, then you lose the whole business. So I used the method when I still was in politics, that when there were very, very bad problem or very serious case, I wanted to talk it openly. I always wanted to go to straight interviews. I mean, in TV and radio. I wanted to be naked in front of the audience. Not literally, but verbally, so that the audience can sense that this guy is so vulnerable, but obviously he's also strong when he wants to be vulnerable and telling this story, which I don't like at all.
Yes.
And I use this method especially in the middle of financial crisis, when we were forced to provide financial assistance packages, bailout packages to the other countries, and they were highly unpopular in all the Nordic countries, especially in this country. And I know I was so well informed that I know that there is no other way forward. We just have to do it, even though nobody likes it. And we managed to get a trust amongst the citizens. So they didn't like this, but they trusted that maybe it's still right thing to do.
Amazing. Any follow-ups?
No, not directly. I mean, I still think it's an interesting, almost dichotomy, working in the public sector, having the role that you had, and stepping into the role you have now in the bank. I see an awful lot of similarities, particularly on what you've just described. So, I also think that it sometimes. Do you miss sitting on the public sector side?
No, I don't.
No.
So, being there, seeing it, got a T-shirt. So, I have seen it all. I don't mean that. No hard feelings, let's put it this way. but I have seen it already, and I'm now very happy to have a chance to utilize my experience and knowledge what has accumulated since I left or when I was in politics. So it's very nice to be on the other side of the table. The only thing which I sometimes miss is the Brussels bubble.
Okay.
Because working in the EU Commission means that you get so much information from 27 member states
Right.
that you can basically you can get a very good overview on our continent. So if somebody asked me to give a half an hour presentation what happens in Slovakia, what happens in Malta or Ireland or Sweden, I could easily do it. Because in Commission you get a good touch on all the member states and everything what is happening in politics. So this I'm missing. Even if I try to follow very closely what is happening in the EU and in member states, it's not that easy to follow everything when you are not there.
Okay.
And also being in the EU politics, if I may use a bad word,
You may.
it's being in politics without shit.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's easier in a sense to be in politics there than in national level. But I'm very happy to be in the bank today.
Okay. I was half expecting you to say you were missing the food in Brussels. You know, the
Yeah,
and French fries.
yeah.
But yeah.
No, Belgian fries.
Oh yeah, Belgian fries.
Yeah,
Yeah, indeed.
yeah, exactly. Good. So finally, on the leadership topic, you kind of touched on that already. But what do you think is the biggest difference between leading in the public sector and now leading your team now here in Nordea? So again, public sector versus private sector. People have maybe some kind of prejudices around what is the differences, but you've been on the both sides of that. So again, what do you think is the biggest difference in leadership between private and public?
I would say that in public sector, okay, let's put it this way. I repeat what our current president has sometimes said, and I fully subscribe what he has said, that if you are prime minister, there is only a handful of people who wish that you are successful, whereas 90% of the people wish that you fail. Yes. And that is quite interesting, but it is like this. Whereas in private sector, everybody wish that the CEO or the leadership team is successful because it's good for everybody. So this may describe the main difference between private and public sector.
It comes down to trust at the end of the day again, doesn't it? You know,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Do we trust this guy and is he going to do the right thing for us?
Yeah.
Whether it's sitting in Nordea or sitting as the Prime Minister.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. We are running out of time quickly.
Yes, we are.
Time goes really fast as we are having fun, as we say on the podcast. But was there something that we didn't get a chance to talk about today that you wanted to mention before we round it off?
No, I don't think so. We went through a whole bunch of topics.
All right. Good. So as we run it off, we typically want to give our guests a chance to tell, first of all, what's next for you. So as you step out of this interview, what's on your table next and right now, and then maybe how can people get in touch if you want people to be able to reach out to you for more questions or otherwise.
Yeah, we concentrate quite heavily on the new EU Commission's agenda. We will watch all those public hearings where commissioner designates are being interviewed by the European Parliament. So they are very informative hearings in a sense that the future commissioners want to present the priorities of the next commission. So it's useful information for us. And then we are building good relationship with commissioners, their cabinets and commission officials. So, and sure, if somebody wants to continue discussions with me, just you can, for instance, send an email, jyrki.katainen@nordea.com.
Wow. that's very open. People usually say LinkedIn or X or Threads or something.
Yeah.
So again, thank you for that. I'm sure people will be taking on that opportunity.
Yeah.
Good. So Jyrki, thank you so much for being a guest
you.
with us today. Again, I'm sure we will get a lot of interesting comments on this, and hopefully we will be able to share those with you as well. But beyond that, Paul, anything else you wanted to say before we close?
I think it's been a fantastically interesting discussion. I really like that the dynamic you shared between having worked both in public sector and now in the private sector. The discussion around financial literacy, I agree with you completely. I think there is an element here where, only a carpenter can teach you how to be a carpenter. So I think there is, from my perspective, asking the schools to teach financial literacy has a complexity in the fact that the teachers aren't financial literate themselves. It's actually easier for bankers to teach kids about, and even actually to a certain degree adults as well, around how to do financial management. So I'm very positively excited about what you've said, where Nordea will fit in and going forwards. It's been a very good discussion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And also one note, we got 2 jokes in this episode. So again, we were breaking records all over the place.
Yes.
All right. With that being said, thank you so much for listening and watching, for everybody on YouTube. And we will see you next time. This has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.